Okay, class, who can tell me what year rubber was invented?
Rubber was invented in 1844.
Very good, Penelope. Do you happen to know where?
Rubber was invented in Springfield, Massachusetts by Charles Goodyear.
Good. Someone has been studying. Okay, everyone, that's all for today. Have a great weekend, alright?
Guys, what was up with statistics today? I feel like all those questions were really irrelevant.
Seriously, what's more puzzling is how that Penelope girl knew all the answers to those random questions. What is she eating?
I bet she gets good sleep every night. I feel like if I got more sleep, I would be doing way better with my schoolwork.
You're probably right. I heard somewhere that people who get more than 8 hours of sleep tend to have better cognitive functioning.
Are you saying that students who get more than 8 hours of sleep are more likely to have higher GPAs than students who get less sleep than that?
I guess I am. Why don't we practice our stat skills and test that hypothesis?
I feel like that will be an easy find. I have a more interesting hypothesis to test. I read the other day that full-time students who also work part-time generally have higher GPAs than students who go to school full-time but don't, work at all.
That sounds really counterintuitive. Let's test both hypotheses and see what we come up with. We can start collecting data today.
Okay, cool. I'll come up with a good survey in between classes today, then hand it out during my evening class tonight.
Sounds good. See you guys tomorrow.
See you later.
Hey guys, are you ready to analyze that data we collected?
Absolutely. I actually had some extra time last night, and I went ahead and did the math.
Hey, couldn't help but overhear you guys talking about getting information on how many hours people sleep. Just wanted to let you know Ashley Becker gets 5 hours and 23 minutes.
Thanks, Damien, but we already collected all the data we need.
Suit yourselves. Wow, I do not even know how to respond to that right now.
Right? Why don't we head over to the library so we can go over the results of our data?
Let's start with the basics. Here's the survey we handed out and collected from our PSU students. For our first hypothesis, which is students who get more than 8 hours of sleep will generally have a higher GPA than students who get less than 8 hours of sleep, we had a sample size of 103 PSU students. As you can see by this bar graph, 87 of the 103 PSU students get less than 8 hours of sleep, and 16 of the 103 PSU students get more than 8 hours of sleep. The average GPA of those 87 PSU students that get less than 8 hours of sleep is 3.4. The average GPA of those 16 PSU students that get more than 8 hours of sleep is 3.42. We did a t-test for two sample means assuming unequal variances to test the claim that students who get more than 8 hours of sleep are more likely to have higher GPAs. We found a test statistic of 0.1769. Using 20 degrees of freedom and alpha 0.05, we found a critical value of 2.086. As you can see, the test statistic does not fall on the critical tails, thus we do not reject the null hypothesis. Thus, there is not enough evidence to support the claim that students who get more than 8 hours of sleep will have better GPAs than those that get less than 8 hours. We then tested for independence between those two variables and found a test statistic of 0.065805. Using 3 degrees of freedom and an alpha 0.05, we found a critical value of 7.815. As you can see, the test statistic does not fall on the critical tail, thus we do not reject the null hypothesis. Thus, there is not enough evidence to support the claim that GPA is dependent of hours of sleep.
Interesting. So even though our sample data suggests that GPA is higher for those that get more than 8 hours of sleep and that there might be some dependency between the two variables, our mathematical analysis proves that this is not the case.
That is interesting. Let's test our second hypothesis that full-time students who work part-time will generally have higher GPAs than full-time students who work less than part-time. For this particular hypothesis, we had a sample size of 86 PSU students. As you can see from our visual representation, 26 of these students work more than 15 hours, while the remaining 60 work less than part-time hours. The average GPA of those who work part-time hours does appear to be slightly higher than those who work less in our sample, with those working part-time having an average GPA of 3.42 and those who work less having an average GPA of 3.41. We conducted a two-sample t-test and found a test statistic of 0.1555. Using an alpha of 0.05 and 59 degrees of freedom, we found our critical values to be positive and negative 2.009. As you can see, our test statistic does not fall in the critical tails. Thus, we failed to reject the null hypothesis. There is not enough evidence to support the claim that full-time students who work part-time will have higher GPAs than full-time students who work less than part-time. We also conducted a test for independence and found that with our data, we have a test statistic of 1.8910. Using an alpha of 0.05 and 3 degrees of freedom, we found our critical value, which is 7.815. As you can see, our test statistic does not fall in this critical tail. Thus, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. There's not enough evidence to support the claim that GPA is dependent on workload.
I knew that hypothesis seemed a little counterintuitive. However, as I look over all our data and math, I see a few areas of weakness. For instance, one confounding variable jumps out. Those who work and go to school may just be harder workers in general, thus having better scores.
I also think the way we collected data should have been done differently. We should have gotten exact quantitative data for hours of sleep and hours worked instead of general categories.
I agree. I think that made the way our data was visually represented inconsistent with what it actually was in our sample.
I must say, even though our hypotheses came back inconsistent with our theories, that wasn't bad for our first statistical study.
Totally. I guess we'll never truly know what puts Penelope so far ahead of the class, but at least we know what it's most likely not.